The satin train of her wedding gown spilled behind Harriet Lawson, like the white caps of a raging river, as she fled down the dirt road, her bare feet slapping against the rough earth of Yosemite, California. The cool October morning air of 1875 stung her lungs as she ran, her chest heaving with each desperate breath. Behind her, the shouts of her father and the man she was supposed to marry echoed from the small white church, growing more distant with each passing second. Tears streamed down her face, blurring her vision, but she didn't dare stop. Ahead was freedom away from arranged marriages, away from a life she never chose. "Miss, over here." The deep voice cut through the commotion behind her. Harriet's head snapped to her right. A tall cowboy sat atop a chestnut quarter horse, his hand extended toward her. His eyes, the color of burnished copper, were wide with urgency beneath the brim of his worn Stetson. "Get on quick," he commanded, his voice leaving no room for hesitation. She didn't think twice. Her hand found his, and with strength she didn't know she possessed, she swung herself onto the horse behind him, her wedding dress billowing around them both like a cloud. "Hold tight." He kicked his horse into motion as she wrapped her arms around his waist, clinging to this stranger as they tore away from the church, from her father, from a marriage she'd been fighting against for months. The thundering hooves drowned out the shouts behind them. Harriet buried her face against the stranger's back, the rough cotton of his shirt scratching her cheek. The scents of leather, horse, and pine filled her senses as they galloped away from town, toward the mountains that surrounded Yosemite Valley. "Thank you," she whispered against his back, though she doubted he could hear her over the wind and hoofbeats. They rode for what felt like hours, the terrain growing steeper and more wooded. Finally, when the horse began to labor beneath them, the cowboy slowed to a trot and then a walk, guiding them deeper into the forest until they reached a small clearing beside a creek. "I reckon we're safe for now," he said, dismounting with fluid grace. He turned and offered her his hand. "Let me help you down, miss." "Harriet," she supplied, taking his hand and awkwardly sliding from the horse, her wedding dress tangling around her legs. "Harriet Lawson." "And you are Levi Quinn," he replied, removing his hat and revealing thick, dark hair that curled slightly at his temples. "Pleased to meet you, Miss Lawson, though I wish the circumstances were different." Harriet nodded, suddenly self-conscious in her elaborate wedding gown, her feet dirty and scratched from her barefoot flight. "Why did you help me, Mr. Quinn? You don't know me." Levi's mouth quirked into a half-smile. "Let's just say I recognize the look of someone desperate to escape." He gestured to a flat rock near the creek. "You should rest, and maybe tell me who you were running from and why, so I know what kind of trouble we're in." Harriet sank onto the rock, exhaustion suddenly washing over her. "I was running from my wedding. My father arranged my marriage to Silas Thornton, the banker's son. He's 30 years older than me and has buried 2 wives already." She shuddered. "I've been trying to convince my father to call it off for months, but he wouldn't listen. Silas owns half the businesses in Yosemite and holds the mortgage on our ranch. Father said it was this or lose everything." Levi frowned, leading his horse to the creek to drink. "So you decided to run instead?" "It was my last option," Harriet said softly. "I couldn't," her voice broke. "I couldn't spend the rest of my life with that man." Levi nodded, his expression solemn. "I understand, but they'll be looking for you. Your father and this Thornton fellow won't take kindly to a runaway bride." "I know." Harriet looked down at her dirty, scratched feet. "I didn't exactly plan this. I just couldn't say the vows." "Well, you can't go back to Yosemite now," Levi said matter-of-factly. "Not for a while, at least." "I have nowhere else to go," Harriet admitted. "No family except my father, no money of my own." Levi was silent for a long moment, studying her. I'm heading north to my brother's ranch in Oregon. It's a long journey, but you're welcome to come along, at least until you figure out your next move." Harriet looked up at him, studying his face. He was handsome in a rugged way, with strong features and those unusual copper-colored eyes. She had no reason to trust this stranger, but something in his steady gaze told her she could. "Why would you do that for me?" she asked. Levi shrugged. "Like I said, I recognize someone who needs an escape." He paused. "And I know what it's like to be forced into a life you didn't choose." Before Harriet could respond, the distant sound of hoofbeats reached them. Levi's head snapped up, his body tensing. "They've found our trail," he said, quickly gathering the horse's reins. "We need to move." Panic surged through Harriet as she scrambled to her feet. "I'll slow you down in this dress." Levi reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a worn pair of trousers and a shirt. "These are spare. They'll be too big, but better than a wedding gown for running." He pointed to a dense thicket of trees. "Change quickly. I'll keep watch." Harriet took the clothes with shaking hands and ducked behind the trees. The wedding dress had been designed to require assistance, but desperation made her resourceful. She tore at the laces and buttons until she could wriggle free, leaving the beautiful gown in a heap on the forest floor. Levi's clothes swallowed her whole. She had to roll the pant legs and sleeves several times, but she secured them with the belt he'd included and emerged from her hiding place feeling strangely liberated. "Much better," Levi said, eyeing her transformation. "Now, let's get moving before they catch up." He helped her onto the horse again, and they set off at a brisk pace, following the creek upstream. The sound of pursuit grew fainter as they navigated terrain that would be difficult for a large group to follow quietly. As they rode, Harriet learned that Levi was 27, a former soldier who'd fought in the final years of the Civil War, and had spent the last decade moving from ranch to ranch as a hired hand. He was heading to Oregon to help his brother Lucas run the ranch he'd established a few years earlier. "What about you?" Levi asked over his shoulder. "Beyond being a runaway bride, who is Harriet Lawson?" Harriet thought for a moment. "I'm 22. I've lived in Yosemite my whole life on my father's ranch. My mother died when I was 14, and since then I've been keeping house for father. I like to read, especially adventure stories. I can ride and shoot, though father doesn't approve of either for a lady." She paused. "That's about it, I suppose. I haven't done much with my life yet." "Well," Levi said, "I'd say running from your own wedding is quite an adventure. Most people just dream of doing something so bold." Harriet laughed, surprised at the sound. "I never thought of myself as bold before today." "Sometimes we surprise ourselves when our backs are against the wall," Levi replied. They traveled until dusk, the forest growing denser around them. When it became too dark to continue safely, Levi found a sheltered spot between two large boulders, hidden from the trail. "We'll camp here tonight," he said, helping Harriet dismount. Her legs trembled from the hours of riding. "Are you hungry?" Harriet nodded, suddenly aware of the gnawing emptiness in her stomach. "Starving, actually. I was too nervous to eat this morning." Levi dug through his saddlebags and produced some jerky and hardtack. "It's not much of a wedding feast, I'm afraid." "It's perfect," Harriet said sincerely, accepting the simple food. They ate in companionable silence as the forest darkened around them. Levi built a small, smokeless fire, just enough to provide a little warmth in the cool autumn night. "We should reach the next town by tomorrow afternoon," he said, feeding a twig to the flames. "We'll get you some proper clothes and supplies there." "I don't have any money," Harriet reminded him. Levi waved away her concern. "I've been saving my wages. I can spare enough to outfit you for the journey." "I'll pay you back," Harriet promised. "Somehow, don't worry about it." Levi's eyes reflected the firelight. "Get some rest. We'll leave at first light." Harriet settled onto the bedroll he'd laid out for her, watching as he positioned himself on the opposite side of the fire, his rifle within easy reach. Despite the hard ground beneath her and the uncertainty of her future, she felt safer than she had in months. As she drifted toward sleep, she wondered what kind of man would risk his own safety to help a stranger flee from her wedding. Whatever his reasons, she was grateful fate had brought Levi Quinn to that church road this morning. Dawn broke with a gentle mist rising from the forest floor. Harriet woke to the smell of coffee brewing over a small fire. Levi was already up, checking his horse's hooves and readying their few belongings for the day's journey. "Morning," he said when he noticed her stirring. "Coffee." "Please," Harriet replied, sitting up and trying to smooth her tangled hair. She felt grimy and disheveled, a far cry from the pristine bride she'd been yesterday morning. Levi handed her a tin cup of strong black coffee and she sipped it gratefully, the warmth and bitterness bringing her fully awake. "Any sign of pursuit?" she asked. "Nothing yet," Levi replied. "But we shouldn't linger. Your father strikes me as a determined man." "He is," Harriet confirmed. "And Sila's. He won't take this humiliation lightly." They packed quickly and were back on the trail as the sun broke over the eastern mountains. The day was clear and cool, perfect for traveling. Harriet's legs and back ached from yesterday's ride, but she made no complaint as they picked their way through the rugged terrain, gradually descending toward a valley that would lead them to the next town. Around midday, they paused by a stream to rest the horse and eat some of their dwindling provisions. Harriet splashed cold water on her face and tried to tame her hair into a braid. "May I ask you something, Mr. Quinn?" she ventured as they sat on a sun-warmed rock. "Levi," he corrected. "And yes, you may. You said yesterday that you recognize someone who needs an escape, and that you know what it's like to be forced into a life you didn't choose. What did you mean by that?" Levi was quiet for so long that Harriet thought he might not answer. Finally, he said, "My father had my life planned out from the day I was born. I was to take over the family business in Boston, marry the daughter of his business partner, and live exactly as he had lived." He smiled ruefully. "I had other ideas." "What happened?" Harriet asked. "The war came," Levi said simply. "I enlisted against my father's wishes. By the time I came home, I couldn't imagine going back to that life, so I headed west instead." He looked at her. "My father disowned me, said if I wouldn't be the son he wanted, I was no son at all." Harriet's heart ached for him. "I'm sorry," Levi shrugged. "Don't be. I found my own path. It's been harder in some ways, but it's mine." He stood, brushing off his trousers. "We should get moving." They reached the small town of Riverton by late afternoon. It was a modest settlement, mostly serving as a supply point for miners and travelers heading into the mountains. Levi led them to a small general store on the main street. "Wait here with the horse," he told Harriet. "I'll get what we need." Harriet stood nervously beside the chestnut gelding, acutely aware of how she must look in Levi's oversized clothes, her hair in a messy braid, her feet in his spare boots that were several sizes too large. A few townspeople cast curious glances her way, but no one approached her. Levi emerged from the store 20 minutes later with several packages wrapped in brown paper. "Let's find somewhere for you to change," he said, loading the purchases into his saddlebags. They found a small boarding house at the edge of town that offered rooms and hot baths for a modest fee. The elderly woman who ran the establishment eyed them suspiciously until Levi explained that Harriet was his cousin, recently widowed, whom he was escorting to family in Oregon. "Poor dear," the woman, Mrs. Finch, said sympathetically. "So young for such tragedy. Come along. I'll show you to a room where you can freshen up." The simple room with its clean bed and washstand seemed like luxury to Harriet after her night in the forest. Mrs. Finch brought up a steaming tub of water and left her to bathe and change into the clothes Levi had purchased. A simple but sturdy riding skirt, 2 cotton blouses, undergarments, and a pair of boots that were only slightly too large. Clean and properly dressed for the first time since her flight, Harriet felt her spirits lift. She plaited her damp hair neatly and went downstairs to find Levi waiting in the small parlor. His eyes widened slightly when he saw her. "You look rested," he said. "Thank you for the clothes," Harriet replied. "They're perfect." Mrs. Finch insisted they stay for supper, and neither was inclined to refuse the offer of a hot meal. As they ate the hearty stew and fresh bread, Harriet realized this was the first time she'd sat at a proper table with Levi, the first chance to really study him without the urgency of escape pressing on them. He had a quiet dignity about him, a thoughtfulness in his expressions that suggested he considered his words carefully before speaking. His hands were strong and calloused from work, but his manners were impeccable, a reminder of his Boston upbringing. "Mrs. Finch offered us rooms for the night," Levi said as they finished their meal. "I accepted. We both could use a real night's rest before continuing." Harriet nodded, relief washing over her at the thought of a real bed. "Do you think we're far enough from Yosemite to be safe?" "For tonight, yes," Levi replied. "But we should continue north tomorrow. Your father might think to check the surrounding towns." They retired early, both exhausted from 2 days of hard travel. Harriet sank into the soft mattress of her room, marveling at how much her life had changed in just 48 hours. She had gone from reluctant bride to fugitive, from her father's dutiful daughter to a woman charting her own course. The thought was both terrifying and exhilarating. Sleep came quickly, deep and dreamless, until a soft knock at her door woke her in the pre-dawn darkness. She opened it to find Levi fully dressed, his expression grim. "We need to leave," he whispered. "Now." "What's happened?" Harriet asked, instantly alert. "A group of men rode into town an hour ago. They're asking about a young woman traveling with a cowboy." Levi's jaw tightened. "Your father's men, I'd wager." Harriet's heart pounded. "How did they find us so quickly?" "Doesn't matter. Get dressed. I'll meet you at the back door in 5 minutes." Harriet dressed hastily in the dark, her fingers fumbling with buttons and laces. She stuffed her few belongings into the small bundle Levi had purchased for her and slipped down the back stairs to find him waiting, his horse already saddled. "Mrs. Finch is keeping watch out front," he whispered. "She'll buy us some time." They mounted quickly and took a narrow path behind the boarding house that led toward the woods. The eastern sky was just beginning to lighten as they reached the cover of the trees. "How far ahead of them are we?" Harriet asked, clinging to Levi's waist as the horse picked its way carefully through the underbrush. "Not far enough," Levi replied grimly. "We need to find a place to hide until they move on." They rode deeper into the forest, following game trails and creek beds to obscure their tracks. The sun rose fully, filtering through the canopy of pine and oak. After several miles, they came upon an abandoned trapper's cabin, half hidden by overgrown vegetation. "This will do," Levi said, dismounting and helping Harriet down. "We'll rest here until I'm sure they've moved on." The cabin was small and musty, with a dirt floor and a single window, its glass long gone. A crude stone fireplace dominated one wall, and a wooden platform that had once served as a bed stood in one corner. Levi led his horse to a small lean-to attached to the back of the cabin and unsaddled him. "We can't risk a fire," he said when he returned. "They might see the smoke. We'll have to make do with cold rations." Harriet nodded, settling on a rough wooden stool that was one of the few pieces of furniture remaining. "I'm sorry I've brought this trouble on you," she said quietly. Levi paused in unpacking some jerky and hardtack. "You didn't bring it on me," he said firmly. "I chose to help you. I knew the risks." "But why?" Harriet pressed. "Why risk so much for a stranger?" Levi was silent for a moment, arranging their meager breakfast on a cloth he'd spread over an upturned crate. "When I saw you running from that church," he finally said, "all I could think was that you were trying to save yourself, just as I once had to save myself. I couldn't ride past and let you face that alone." The simple honesty of his words touched Harriet deeply. "Thank you," she whispered. "I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't been there." They ate in companionable silence, listening to the forest sounds around them. After breakfast, Levi checked the perimeter of the cabin, ensuring they were well hidden from any passing search party. "I'm going to scout the area," he told Harriet. "See if I can spot any sign of pursuit. Stay here and keep quiet." Harriet nodded, trying not to show her fear at being left alone. Levi must have seen it anyway, because his expression softened. "I won't go far," he promised, "and I'll be back before midday." Alone in the cabin, Harriet tried to keep herself occupied by cleaning the dusty interior as best she could without water. She found an old broom in a corner and swept the dirt floor, then arranged their few belongings neatly on the wooden platform. The physical activity helped calm her nerves somewhat, but every snapping twig or rustling leaf outside made her freeze in fear. What would happen if her father's men found her? Would they force her to return to Yosemite to Sela's? The thought made her stomach clench with dread. And what about Levi? Would they harm him for helping her escape? Harriet was so lost in these worrying thoughts that she nearly screamed when the cabin door opened. Levi slipped inside, his expression grave. "They're still searching," he said without preamble. "I spotted 3 men about 2 miles south, combing the woods. We need to stay here until nightfall, then move on under cover of darkness." Harriet swallowed hard. "Do you think they know we're in these woods?" "They suspect it," Levi replied, setting his rifle by the door. "But it's a large area to search, and we've covered our tracks well." They spent the day in tense silence, speaking little, both listening for any sound that might indicate discovery. As the hours passed and no searchers appeared, Harriet gradually relaxed enough to ask Levi more about his life since leaving Boston. "I drifted for a while after the war," he told her as they shared a sparse midday meal. "Worked cattle drives in Texas, did some mining in Colorado, ranch work in Wyoming. Never stayed in one place too long." "And now you're heading to your brother's ranch," Harriet said. "Why now?" Levi's mouth quirked in a half-smile. "Lucas has been asking me to come for years. I finally decided it was time to put down some roots. He's got a good spread in the Willamette Valley and he needs help running it." "Does he have a family?" Harriet asked. "A wife, Charlotte, and 2 young children." Levi's expression softened at the mention of his niece and nephew. "They're good people. You'll like them." The casual way he included her in his future plans sent a strange flutter through Harriet's chest. "I'm sure I will," she said softly. As dusk fell, they prepared to leave the relative safety of the cabin. Levi had decided they would travel by night for the next few days to reduce the risk of being spotted by searchers. "The moon is nearly full," he said as he saddled his horse. "It should give us enough light to travel safely. We'll head northeast, away from the main trails." They set out in the deepening twilight, the forest around them transforming into a world of silver and shadow under the rising moon. Harriet rode behind Levi, her arms around his waist, her body swaying with the rhythm of the horse's movement. The night was cool but not uncomfortably so, and the sounds of nocturnal creatures, owls hooting, the occasional distant howl of a coyote created an eerie backdrop to their journey. Despite the danger and uncertainty of their situation, Harriet found herself oddly at peace. There was something profoundly liberating about having broken free of the path that had been set for her, about moving through the moonlit forest toward an unknown future of her own choosing. They rode for several hours before stopping to rest in a small clearing. Levi spread a blanket on the ground for Harriet and went to check their surroundings, returning with the news that all seemed quiet. "We should be safe for a few hours' sleep," he said, settling his bedroll several feet from hers. "I'll take first watch." Harriet lay on her blanket, gazing up at the stars visible through the gap in the trees above. "Levi," she said softly, "do you ever regret leaving your old life behind?" There was a long pause before he answered. "Sometimes I wonder what might have been," he admitted. "The life I left would have been easier in many ways, comfortable, secure." He shifted, his profile silvered by moonlight. "But no, I don't regret it. A comfortable cage is still a cage." Harriet thought about his words as she drifted toward sleep. A comfortable cage is still a cage. Yes, that was exactly what her life in Yosemite had become after her mother died, a cage of her father's making, gilded with the promise of security, but a cage nonetheless. She had been right to run, whatever uncertainties lay ahead. The next 3 days followed a similar pattern, traveling by night, resting by day in whatever sheltered spots they could find. They avoided towns and settlements, making do with the supplies Levi had purchased in Riverton, and whatever game he could trap or shoot. Harriet learned to move quietly through the forest, to listen for the sounds that might indicate danger, to make camp efficiently with minimal tools. On the 4th night, they crossed a fast-flowing river that Levi said marked the border between California and Oregon. The crossing was treacherous, the water high and cold from recent mountain rains. Halfway across, the current nearly swept them away, but Levi's horse, a steady, brave animal named Buck, fought against the pull of the water and brought them safely to the other side. Soaked and shivering, they made camp in a small cave Levi discovered not far from the riverbank. Here, sheltered from view, he risked a small fire to dry their clothes and warm their bodies. "We should be safe now," he said as they huddled near the flames. "Even if they've followed us this far, they won't expect us to have crossed the river in these conditions." Harriet nodded, holding her hands toward the fire. "How much farther to your brother's ranch?" "About a week's journey at the pace we've been traveling," Levi replied. "We can move more openly now, follow the main trails. It will be faster." The thought of reaching their destination filled Harriet with mixed emotions. On one hand, she longed for the safety and stability that Lucas Quinn's ranch represented. On the other, she had grown accustomed to these days alone with Levi, to their quiet conversations as they rode, to the growing understanding between them. What would happen once they reached Oregon? Would Levi expect her to move on once she was safely away from her father's reach? "What will you do once we reach your brother's ranch?" Levi asked, as if reading her thoughts. Harriet stared into the flames. "I'm not sure," she admitted. "I haven't thought that far ahead. I have some skills. I can cook and so tend a garden. Perhaps I could find work in a nearby town." Levi nodded slowly. "Or you could stay at the ranch for a while. Lucas and Charlotte could use the help with the children and the house." He paused. "If you wanted to, that is." Harriet looked up at him, catching a warmth in his gaze that made her heart beat faster. "I'd like that," she said softly, "if they wouldn't mind." "They wouldn't," Levi assured her. "Lucas has always said there's room for family at Quinn's Crossing." Family. The word hung between them, laden with implications neither was ready to voice. But in that moment, as the firelight played across Levi's face, and the sound of the river rushed outside their small cave, Harriet felt the first stirrings of hope for a future she had never dared imagine. The next morning dawned clear and cool, the autumn sun casting long shadows through the pines as they continued their journey north. True to his word, Levi now kept them on the main trails, though they remained vigilant for any sign of pursuit. They passed through small settlements and isolated homesteads, occasionally stopping to purchase supplies or exchange news with locals. No one they met had heard of a search for a runaway bride from Yosemite, which confirmed Levi's belief that they had successfully evaded Harriet's father and Silas Thornton. Still, they gave false names when asked and never lingered longer than necessary. On the 6th day of their journey, they reached a substantial town called Ashland, where Levi suggested they stop for a proper meal and perhaps a night in a real bed. The town was bustling with activity, its main street lined with businesses catering to the steady stream of travelers and settlers heading north. "We should get you some more clothes," Levi said as they rode slowly down the street, "and supplies for the rest of the journey." Harriet nodded, suddenly self-conscious about her appearance after nearly a week on the trail. Her single riding skirt was dusty and worn, her 2 blouses showing the effects of repeated washings in cold streams. They found a small hotel near the center of town that offered clean rooms and hot baths for a reasonable price. The clerk eyed them curiously, but asked no questions when Levi requested separate rooms. "Meet me in the dining room when you're ready," Levi told Harriet, handing her some money. "There's a dressmaker's shop next door if you want to see about getting something new to wear." Harriet accepted the money with a grateful smile. "I'll pay you back someday," she promised, as she had each time he'd provided for her needs during their journey. "No need," Levi replied, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "Consider it a gift." The hot bath was pure bliss after days of hasty washings in cold streams. Harriet soaked until the water cooled, washing her hair thoroughly and scrubbing away the grime of travel. Wrapped in a clean towel, she surveyed her reflection in the small mirror above the washstand. Her face was tanned from days in the sun, her brown hair lighter from the same exposure. She looked different, somehow more confident, perhaps, or simply more herself. At the dressmaker's shop, she selected a new riding skirt in a practical brown wool, 2 fresh blouses, and a warm shawl for the cooling autumn evenings. The shopkeeper, a friendly woman named Mrs. Davis, helped her choose the items and promised to have them ready by morning. "Your husband seems like a good man," Mrs. Davis remarked as she measured Harriet for the skirt. Harriet felt her cheeks warm. "He's not my husband," she said quickly. "He's a friend who's escorting me to family in the Willamette Valley." Mrs. Davis raised an eyebrow but said only, "Well, friend or husband, he cares enough to make sure you're properly outfitted for the journey. That says something about his character." Dressed in her cleanest clothes and with her hair neatly braided, Harriet made her way to the hotel dining room. Levi was already there, seated at a corner table. He stood as she approached, and Harriet was struck by how different he looked, freshly shaven and dressed in clean clothes, his dark hair still damp from his own bath. "You look refreshed," he said as he held her chair. "As do you," Harriet replied, settling across from him. "It's amazing what a hot bath and clean clothes can do for one's spirits." They ordered a hearty meal: roast beef, potatoes, fresh bread, and apple pie for dessert, and for the first time in days, ate until they were truly full. As they lingered over coffee, Harriet found herself studying Levi's face, noting the fine lines at the corners of his eyes, the slight cleft in his chin, the way his copper-colored eyes seemed to change shade with his mood. "Is something wrong?" he asked, catching her gaze. Harriet shook her head. "No, I was just thinking how strange it is that I feel I've known you much longer than a week." She paused. "You've risked so much to help me, and I know so little about you, really." Levi's expression softened. "What would you like to know?" "Everything," Harriet said simply. Who you were before the war, what you saw during it, what made you decide to keep moving west afterward, what makes you happy, what you dream about. Levi was silent for a moment, turning his coffee cup slowly between his hands. That's quite a list, he finally said. It might take a while to tell. We have time, Harriet replied softly. And so, as the dining room slowly emptied around them, Levi told her about his childhood in Boston, the son of a successful shipping merchant who expected his firstborn to follow in his footsteps. He described his mother, a gentle, cultured woman who had taught him to love books and music, but who had never stood against his father's strict expectations. He spoke of his younger brother Lucas, always more willing to challenge their father's authority, who had left for the West as soon as he was old enough. When the war came, I saw it as my chance to escape, to find out who I was away from my father's influence, Levi admitted. I was 20 when I enlisted. I thought it would be an adventure. His expression darkened. I was a fool. He spoke little of the war itself, except to say that he had seen things that still haunted his dreams sometimes. After, unable to face returning to Boston and his father's plans, he had written to inform his parents he was heading west, and had received in reply a terse letter from his father disowning him. My mother sent me some money secretly, Levi said, and a note saying she understood why I couldn't come home. That was the last I heard from either of them. My father died 3 years ago. Lucas wrote to tell me. And your mother, Harriet asked gently, still alive as far as I know, still in Boston. I write to her occasionally, but she never replies. I think she fears my father's disapproval even now. Harriet reached across the table and placed her hand over his. I'm so sorry, Levi. He turned his hand to clasp hers, his palm warm and calloused against her skin. It was a long time ago, he said. I've made my peace with it. But Harriet could see in his eyes that the wounds were not entirely healed. She squeezed his hand gently before withdrawing hers. What about you? Levi asked, his tone lightening. Tell me about Harriet Lawson. Harriet smiled. There's not much to tell. I grew up on my father's ranch outside Yosemite. My mother taught me to read and write, to love poetry and painting. She died of fever when I was 14. Her smile faltered. After that, my father changed. He became harder, more focused on the ranch and making money. He sent me to a ladies' boarding school in Sacramento for 2 years, but when I came home, he made it clear my education was over. My place was keeping his house until I married and kept someone else's. She told him about the years that followed the increasing isolation, as her father discouraged friendships that didn't advance his interests, his growing obsession with expanding his land holdings, and finally, his arrangement with Silas Thornton. Silas had been widowed twice, Harriet said, her voice dropping to nearly a whisper. His first wife died in childbirth, the second. There were rumors. Nothing anyone could prove, but people whispered that she was afraid of him, that she had bruises she couldn't explain. She shuddered. When Father told me I was to marry him, I begged him to reconsider. But Silas held the mortgage on our ranch and Father owed him money besides. The marriage would clear the debts and secure our future, he said. So you agreed? Levi asked. Harriet nodded. At first. I thought perhaps I could make the best of it. But as the wedding approached, I heard more whispers about Silas, and I saw how he looked at me like I was a possession he was acquiring. Her hands trembled slightly as she recalled those cold, assessing gazes. The night before the wedding, I overheard him talking to my father. He said he expected me to provide him with a son within the year, that his previous wives had failed him in that regard. Levi's jaw tightened, a muscle working in his cheek. So you ran. I tried to that night. But Father caught me and locked me in my room until morning. Harriet took a deep breath. When we got to the church, I knew I couldn't go through with it. When the minister asked if anyone objected to the union, I spoke up. I objected to my own wedding. Despite the seriousness of the conversation, Levi's mouth quirked in a half-smile. I wish I could have seen that. It wasn't my finest moment, Harriet admitted ruefully. I shouted that I would not marry Silas Thornton if he were the last man on earth, threw my bouquet at my father, and ran for the door. Silas tried to grab me, but I kicked him rather hard and kept running. She glanced down at her now shod feet. I didn't even realize I'd left my shoes behind until I was halfway down the road. That's when I saw you, Levi said softly, running barefoot from the church altar, your wedding dress billowing behind you like sails in a storm. Their eyes met across the table, and something passed between them, a recognition, perhaps, of kindred spirits who had both chosen freedom over security, the unknown over the safely mapped. "I'm glad you did," Harriet whispered. "I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't been there." The moment stretched between them, charged with unspoken feelings. Finally, Levi broke the silence. "It's getting late. We should get some rest. We have a long ride ahead tomorrow." They climbed the stairs to their rooms in companionable silence. At Harriet's door, Levi paused. "Harriet," he said, his voice low, "I want you to know that when we reach Quinn's Crossing, you'll be welcome to stay as long as you wish. But if you decide you want to move on, to make your own way somewhere else, I'll understand, and I'll help you however I can." Harriet looked up at him, touched by his consideration. "Thank you," she said, "but I think I'd like to stay at least for a while if your brother and his wife will have me." Levi's smile was warm. "They will. Good night, Harriet. Good night, Levi." That night, as Harriet lay in the unfamiliar bed, listening to the muffled sounds of the hotel around her, she reflected on how drastically her life had changed in the span of a week. She had gone from being a dutiful daughter, resigned to a marriage she dreaded, to a woman making her own choices, traveling toward a future of her own design. And at the center of that transformation was Levi Quinn, a man who understood what it meant to break free from the expectations of others. The thought of him, his quiet strength, his unexpected gentleness, the understanding in his copper eyes sent a warmth through her that had nothing to do with the blankets covering her. It was too soon, she told herself, to name the feeling growing in her heart. But it was there nonetheless, taking root and growing stronger with each passing day. The next morning they set out refreshed, with new supplies and Harriet's new clothes packed neatly in her small bundle. The weather was perfect for traveling, cool but sunny, the sky a clear, deep blue above the autumn-hued forest. They made good time on the well-maintained road, passing other travelers heading both north and south. "We should reach the Rogue River by nightfall," Levi said as they paused to rest the horse around midday. "There's a small settlement there where we can stay the night." They continued on, the terrain gradually changing as they rode. The dense forests began to give way to more open country, with rolling hills covered in golden grass and scattered stands of oak and pine. In the distance, mountains rose blue and misty against the horizon. "It's beautiful," Harriet remarked as they crested a hill and the valley spread before them. "Wait until you see the Willamette Valley," Levi replied. "Some of the richest farmland you'll ever lay eyes on, bordered by mountains on both sides." As promised, they reached the Rogue River settlement just as dusk was falling. It was smaller than Ashland, just a cluster of buildings serving the needs of travelers and the scattered farms and homesteads in the area. They found a simple boarding house that offered rooms and meals. After a plain but filling dinner, they sat on the boarding house's small front porch, watching as the stars appeared one by one in the darkening sky. The air was crisp with the promise of winter not far off, and Harriet was glad for her new shawl wrapped around her shoulders. "Tell me about Quinn's Crossing," she said after they had sat in comfortable silence for some time. "What's it like?" Levi leaned back in his chair, his expression softening with fondness. "It's a good piece of land, about 500 acres along a tributary of the Willamette River. Lucas built the main house himself when he first settled there 6 years ago. It's not fancy, but it's solid and warm. There's a barn, stables, a bunkhouse for the hands, though there are only 3 working there now. They raise cattle mostly, but Charlotte keeps a big kitchen garden and they grow some crops too." "And your brother's family," Harriet prompted. "You mentioned children, too," Levi confirmed. "William is 4 and little Sarah just turned 2. Charlotte's expecting another come spring." His mouth quirked in a smile. "Lucas always said he wanted a house full of children. Looks like he's getting his wish." "They sound wonderful," Harriet said, trying to picture the family that was to be her sanctuary. "They are," Levi agreed. "Lucas is. He's always been the better of us. More straightforward, more honest about what he wants. And Charlotte, you'll like her. She's strong, capable. Had to be, coming out here as a bride to a ranch that was little more than a cabin and a dream at the time." He paused, his expression growing more serious. "I should warn you, though. They might assume we're together. I wrote to Lucas after we left Riverton, telling him I was bringing a young woman with me who needed a safe place to stay, but I didn't explain the circumstances fully." Harriet felt heat rise to her cheeks. "Oh, I see." "I'll explain everything when we arrive," Levi assured her. "They'll understand." "Of course." Harriet gazed out at the darkened street, wondering what Lucas and Charlotte Quinn would think of her, a runaway bride with nothing to her name, dependent on their charity. "Do you think they'll believe me about why I ran?" Levi turned to look at her, his expression serious. "Yes," he said simply. "They'll believe you because I do, and they know I wouldn't bring someone into their home if I had any doubts about their character." His faith in her warmed Harriet more than her shawl. "Thank you," she said softly. The rest of their journey passed without incident. They traveled through increasingly settled country, passing farms and ranches, small towns and isolated homesteads. The weather held fair, though the nights grew colder as October gave way to November. On the afternoon of the 10th day since leaving Yosemite, Levi reined in his horse at the top of a gentle rise and pointed ahead. "There it is," he said. "Willamette Valley." Harriet gasped at the vista before them. The valley stretched wide and green between distant mountains, a river winding through its center like a silver ribbon. Patchwork fields, some golden with harvested grain, others dark with fresh plowing, spread across the valley floor. Scattered farmhouses and barns dotted the landscape, smoke rising from chimneys against the crisp blue sky. "It's magnificent," she breathed. "Quinn's Crossing is about 2 hours' ride from here," Levi said, nudging his horse forward. "We'll be there before sunset." As they descended into the valley, Harriet felt a curious mixture of anticipation and trepidation. For 10 days, it had been just her and Levi, making their way north, dependent only on each other. Now they were about to enter a new phase, one where other people, other expectations, other relationships would shape their days. What would Lucas and Charlotte make of her? Would they welcome her as Levi promised, or would they see her as an unwanted complication? And what of her growing feelings for Levi? Would they change once they were no longer alone together on the trail? These questions tumbled through her mind as they rode, until finally Levi pointed to a distant cluster of buildings nestled against a backdrop of pine-covered hills. "There," he said. "Quinn's Crossing." As they drew closer, Harriet could make out a substantial log house with a wide porch, a large barn, stables, and what must be the bunkhouse Levi had mentioned. Fields stretched away on either side, some planted with winter wheat, others lying fallow. A creek ran along one edge of the property, lined with willows and cottonwoods now bare of leaves. They were halfway down the long drive leading to the house when the front door burst open, and a small figure came running toward them, followed more sedately by a woman holding a toddler. Uncle Levi. Uncle Levi, the running child shouted. Levi dismounted quickly and caught the boy as he hurled himself forward, swinging him high in the air before settling him on his hip. "William, look how you've grown." Harriet watched as the woman Charlotte, she presumed, approached with a warm smile, the little girl in her arms regarding Levi and the stranger behind him with solemn eyes. Harriet Quinn was a handsome woman in her late 20s, her brown hair pulled back in a simple knot, her figure showing the first signs of the coming child. "Levi," she said, leaning forward to kiss his cheek, "we were beginning to wonder if you'd changed your mind." "Never," Levi replied, setting William down to embrace his sister-in-law carefully. "Charlotte, this is Harriet Lawson. Harriet, my sister-in-law, Harriet Quinn, and my niece and nephew, Sarah and William." Charlotte's warm brown eyes assessed Harriet with friendly curiosity. "Welcome to Quinn's Crossing, Miss Lawson. We're glad you've come." "Thank you for having me," Harriet replied, touched by the genuine welcome in the other woman's voice. "Lucas is out checking the north pasture fence with the hands," Charlotte explained as they walked toward the house. "He should be back before supper. Come inside and get settled. You both must be exhausted." The house was exactly as Levi had described, not fancy, but solid and warm, with polished wooden floors, simple, sturdy furniture, and colorful braided rugs. A fire crackled in the large stone fireplace that dominated the main room, and delicious smells wafted from the kitchen at the back. "I've prepared the spare room for you, Miss Lawson," Charlotte said, leading the way down a short hallway. "It's not much, but I hope you'll be comfortable." The room was small but pleasant, with a narrow bed covered in a patchwork quilt, a chest of drawers, and a small table with a basin and pitcher. A window looked out over the kitchen garden and beyond it the creek and hills. "It's lovely," Harriet said sincerely. "And please call me Harriet." Charlotte smiled. "Harriet, then. I'll let you freshen up. Supper will be ready in about an hour." Left alone, Harriet sank onto the edge of the bed, suddenly overcome with emotion. After days of travel, of uncertainty and fear, she was here in this warm, welcoming home. She was safe. The realization brought tears to her eyes, and for a few moments, she allowed herself to simply feel the relief washing through her. When she had composed herself, she used the water in the pitcher to wash her face and hands, and changed into her cleanest blouse. As she was braiding her hair, a knock sounded at her door. "Come in," she called, expecting Charlotte, but it was Levi who entered, freshly washed and changed himself. "Are you settling in all right?" "Yes, thank you," Harriet replied. "Charlotte has been very kind. I told you she would be." Levi paused, then added, "I've explained to her why we're here about your situation. I hope you don't mind. I thought it would be easier if she understood from the start." "Of course I don't mind," Harriet assured him. "What did she say?" "That you were brave to leave, and that you're welcome here for as long as you wish to stay." Levi's expression softened. "I told you they'd understand." Harriet felt a rush of gratitude toward these people who were opening their home to her without question. "I want to help," she said earnestly. "I don't want to be a burden." "You won't be," Levi assured her. "There's always work to be done on a ranch, but don't worry about that now. Rest. Settle in. There's time enough for everything else." They were interrupted by William, who came barreling down the hall to announce that Papa's home. Levi grinned at the boy's excitement. "Shall we go meet my brother?" he asked Harriet, offering his arm with a formality that made her smile. Lucas Quinn was a slightly taller, broader version of his brother, with the same dark hair and copper eyes. He had just come in from the fields, his clothes dusty and a day's growth of beard shadowing his jaw. But his face lit up at the sight of Levi, and the brothers embraced warmly, thumping each other's backs. "About time you showed up," Lucas said, his voice deep and good-humored. "We were beginning to think you'd gotten lost." "Just taking the scenic route," Levi replied with a grin. Lucas turned to Harriet, his expression curious but kind. "And you must be Miss Lawson. Charlotte's told me about your situation. You're welcome here as long as you need a place to stay." "Thank you, Mr. Quinn," Harriet said, touched by his immediate acceptance. "I'm grateful for your hospitality." "Lucas, please," he insisted. "We're not much for formality here." Supper was a lively affair, with William chattering about his day, Sarah occasionally joining in with a word or two, and the adults catching up on news. Lucas was eager to hear about their journey, and Levi told an edited version that emphasized the beauty of the landscape and downplayed the danger of pursuit. Harriet noticed that he never mentioned the intimate conversations they'd shared, the growing connection between them that had made the long days on the trail feel like a different kind of journey altogether. After the meal, when the children had been put to bed and Lucas had gone out for a final check of the livestock, Harriet found herself alone with Charlotte in the kitchen, helping to wash the dishes. "Levi tells me you're quite skilled with a household," Charlotte remarked as she handed Harriet a plate to dry. "I've kept house for my father since my mother died," Harriet replied. "Though I'm sure a ranch this size is a different challenge altogether." Charlotte smiled. "It can be, especially with little ones underfoot and another on the way. I won't pretend I couldn't use the help." She paused, studying Harriet with kind but perceptive eyes. "But that's not the only reason you're welcome here." Levi's letter. "Well, he didn't say much about you, but what he did say told me a great deal." Harriet felt her cheeks warm. "Oh," he said he'd met someone who needed help, someone brave enough to change her own fate. Charlotte's smile deepened. "In all the years I've known Levi, I've never known him to bring anyone to meet his family, not once." Harriet didn't know how to respond to this revelation. "We're friends," she finally said. "He's been very kind to me." Charlotte murmured noncommittally. "Well, whatever you are to each other, I'm glad you're here, and not just because I could use the help." She patted her rounded belly. "This little one has been making me tire more quickly than I'd like." They finished the dishes in companionable conversation, Charlotte telling Harriet about the rhythms of life at Quinn's Crossing, the nearest town, a place called Miller's Station, about an hour's ride away, and the neighbors scattered across the valley. Later, as Harriet prepared for bed in her small room, she reflected on Charlotte's words about Levi. Had he really never brought anyone to meet his family before? What did that mean, if anything, for the two of them? The first week at Quinn's Crossing passed quickly, as Harriet settled into the rhythms of ranch life. She helped Charlotte with the cooking and cleaning, learned to milk the 2 dairy cows, and spent hours playing with William and Sarah, who had quickly accepted her as a new and fascinating addition to their world. Levi, meanwhile, threw himself into the work of the ranch. He and Lucas spent long days checking fences, moving cattle to winter pastures, and making repairs to the outbuildings before the winter weather set in fully. In the evenings, exhausted from the day's labor, he would join the family for dinner, listen to Harriet read to the children before bed, and then often sit with Lucas by the fire, discussing ranch business until late into the night. Harriet saw less of him than she had during their journey, and when they were together, there were always others present. She missed their quiet conversations, the growing ease they had developed with each other on the trail. But she reminded herself that she was lucky to be here, safe and welcomed, and that she had no right to expect anything more from Levi than he had already given. On the Sunday of her second week at Quinn's Crossing, Charlotte announced at breakfast that they would be attending services at the small church in Miller's Station. "It's a good chance to see neighbors," she explained to Harriet. "And Reverend Thompson is a kind man, not one for fire and brimstone." Harriet hesitated, memories of her almost wedding making her uneasy at the thought of entering another church. Levi, noticing her discomfort, spoke up. "Perhaps Harriet would prefer to stay behind this time," he suggested. "It's been a busy week for everyone." Charlotte looked from one to the other, understanding dawning in her eyes. "Of course," she said smoothly. "It might be nice for someone to stay with the house anyway. Next time, perhaps." So it was that Harriet found herself alone at the ranch for the first time since their arrival. After the family had departed in the wagon, dressed in their Sunday best, she moved through the quiet house, enjoying the rare solitude. She had just settled on the front porch with a book Charlotte had lent her when the sound of approaching hoofbeats made her look up. A rider was coming up the drive, not from the direction of Miller's Station, but from the main road. Harriet's heart began to pound. Could it be her father, Silas? Had they somehow tracked her all the way to Oregon? She was about to retreat into the house when she recognized the figure on the horse. It was Levi, returning alone. "What happened?" she asked as he dismounted and tied his horse to the porch rail. "Where are the others?" "On their way to church," Levi replied, climbing the porch steps. "I decided I wasn't in a church-going mood today." "Oh." Harriet didn't know what else to say. Her relief at seeing him instead of her pursuers was tempered by confusion at his unexpected return. Levi sat down in the chair beside hers. "The truth is, I wanted to talk to you, alone. We haven't had much chance for that since we arrived." Harriet marked her place in the book and set it aside. "No, we haven't. Are you happy here?" Levi asked, his direct gaze making her heart beat a little faster. "Yes," she answered honestly. "Your family has been wonderful. I feel safe here, welcomed." Levi nodded, looking out over the fields and hills beyond. "I'm glad. I wanted that for you." A silence fell between them, not uncomfortable but charged with unspoken thoughts. Finally, Harriet gathered her courage. "What about you? Are you happy to be here?" Levi considered the question. "Happy to see Lucas and his family, yes. Happy to be working alongside my brother again, definitely." He paused, but something's been missing. "What?" Harriet asked, though part of her already knew the answer. Levi turned to face her fully. "You," he said simply. "Those days on the trail, just the two of us. I've missed talking with you, being with you." Harriet's breath caught. "I've missed that too," she admitted. "Harriet." Levi reached out and took her hand, his calloused palm warm against her skin. "I know we haven't known each other long, and I know you're still finding your footing after everything that's happened, but these past weeks, they've changed me." "You've changed me." "How?" Harriet whispered, barely daring to hope he meant what she thought he did. "Before I met you, I was content to drift, to keep moving, never staying in one place long enough to put down roots. But now—" He squeezed her hand gently. "Now I find myself thinking about the future. A future here at Quinn's Crossing. A future with you if you'll have me." Harriet felt tears prick her eyes. "Levi, are you saying—" "I'm saying I love you, Harriet Lawson," Levi said, his voice steady despite the vulnerability in his eyes. "I think I started falling for you that first day when you had the courage to run from a life you didn't want, and every day since then has only made me more certain. Oh, Levi." Harriet's voice trembled with emotion. "I love you too. I've been afraid to say it, afraid it was too soon, that you might not feel the same way." Levi's face lit with a joy that took her breath away. "You love me?" "Yes," Harriet laughed through her tears. "How could I not? You saved me in every way a person can be saved." Levi raised his free hand to cup her cheek, his touch gentle. "May I kiss you?" he asked softly. Harriet nodded, her heart racing as he leaned forward. His lips met hers in a kiss that was tender yet firm, a promise and a claiming all at once. She responded eagerly, her hands coming up to rest on his shoulders as the kiss deepened. When they finally drew apart, both a little breathless, Levi rested his forehead against hers. "I've been wanting to do that since Ashland," he admitted with a rueful smile. "Why didn't you?" Harriet asked, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. "I wasn't sure you were ready. After everything with Silas and your father, I didn't want to pressure you." Harriet smiled. "Always the gentleman." "Not always," Levi replied, his eyes darkening as he leaned in to kiss her again, more passionately this time. They spent the morning on the porch, talking and kissing and planning a future neither had dared imagine just weeks before. Levi spoke of building a house of their own on Quinn's Crossing land, of working alongside Lucas to expand the ranch, of children and seasons and growing old together. "Are you sure?" Harriet asked at one point. "You've spent so many years moving, never staying in one place." "Won't you miss that freedom?" Levi shook his head. "That wasn't freedom," he said. "It was running. From my father's disapproval, from my own uncertainty about who I was and what I wanted." He took her hands in his. "You've helped me find those answers. I know who I am now. I know what I want. And it's this: a home, a purpose, a family. With you." When the wagon returned from church in the early afternoon, Lucas, Charlotte, and the children found Levi and Harriet sitting close together on the porch, their entwined hands telling the story without words. Charlotte's eyes lit up with pleased understanding, while Lucas shook his head with a grin. "About time," he said to his brother. "I was wondering how long you were going to pretend you weren't sweet on her." William, not understanding the adult undercurrents, simply barreled up the steps demanding to know if Uncle Levi and Miss Harriet would play horses with him, while little Sarah held up her arms to be lifted into Harriet's lap. That evening, after the children were in bed, the four adults sat around the fire. Levi formally asked Lucas for permission to build a house on a corner of the ranch property, and his brother readily agreed. "That south pasture near the creek would be perfect," Lucas said. "Good water, sheltered from the north wind, not too far from the main house. We can start clearing the ground this winter," Levi said, his arm around Harriet's shoulders. "Be ready to build in the spring." "And the wedding?" Charlotte asked, her eyes twinkling. "When will that be?" Harriet and Levi exchanged glances. "We haven't discussed that yet," Harriet admitted. "Take your time," Charlotte advised. "Though not too much time, or this little one will be walking before you tie the knot." She patted her rounded belly with a laugh. As the weeks passed, Harriet found herself settling more deeply into life at Quinn's Crossing. The early December weather turned cold and wet, keeping everyone close to the house much of the time. She and Charlotte spent long hours in the kitchen, preparing meals, preserving the last of the garden's bounty, and sewing clothes for the coming baby. Harriet discovered she had a talent for storytelling that delighted William and Sarah, and she began creating simple tales for them that featured brave children having adventures in the valley. And there was Levi. Each day brought them closer, as they learned the rhythms of loving each other. Stolen kisses in the pantry, long walks along the creek when the weather permitted, evenings by the fire after the others had gone to bed, talking softly about their hopes and plans. They decided to wait until spring for the wedding, to give themselves time to know each other better and to allow Levi to make progress on their house. But their commitment to each other was unwavering, growing stronger with each passing day. One evening in mid-December, as a rare snowfall blanketed the valley in white, a knock came at the door just as the family was finishing supper. Lucas went to answer it, returning with a serious expression. "Levi, Harriet, there's a man here asking for you both." Harriet felt fear grip her heart. Had her father found her after all? But the man who stepped into the warm kitchen was not her father, nor Silas Thornton. He was a stranger, a weathered man in his 50s wearing the badge of a U.S. Marshal. "Evening, folks," he said, removing his hat. "I'm Marshal James Blackburn. Sorry to intrude on your supper, but I've been tracking a pair that matches the description of these two for some time now." Levi stepped forward, placing himself slightly in front of Harriet. "What's this about, Marshal?" "Got word from a sheriff down in Yosemite, California. Seems a young woman went missing on her wedding day, and a local cowboy disappeared at the same time. The bride's father is mighty concerned about his daughter." Harriet moved to stand beside Levi, her hand finding his. "I'm Harriet Lawson," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "And I wasn't missing, I left of my own free will." The marshal studied her carefully. "That's so. Your father says different, says this man kidnapped you from your own wedding." "He's lying," Harriet said firmly. "I ran because I didn't want to marry the man he'd chosen for me, a man twice my age who had already buried 2 wives under suspicious circumstances. Levi helped me escape, but it was my choice to go with him." Marshal Blackburn's weathered face revealed nothing of his thoughts. "And you're here of your own free will now?" "Yes," Harriet replied without hesitation. "This is my home now, these are my family." She squeezed Levi's hand. "And this is the man I've chosen to marry." The marshal looked from Harriet to Levi, then to Lucas and Charlotte, who had moved to stand supportively behind them. "Marshal," Lucas said, "my brother and Miss Lawson have been with us for over a month. They're planning to build a home here to be married in the spring. Whatever her father may claim, she's here because she wants to be." Marshal Blackburn sighed, replacing his hat. "Well, I had to ask. Law says I need to make sure no one's being held against their will." He looked directly at Harriet. "You're sure about this, miss?" "Once I ride away, I'll report back that you're safe in making your own choices. Your father won't likely take that well." "I'm sure," Harriet said firmly. "I don't wish my father ill, but I won't return to Yosemite or to the life he planned for me." The marshal nodded. "Fair enough. You're both free to go about your business." He turned to leave, then paused at the door. "If you don't mind a word of advice, make that wedding sooner rather than later. A marriage certificate might discourage further interference from California." After the marshal had gone, Harriet sagged against Levi, the tension draining from her body. "Do you think that's the end of it?" she asked. "I hope so," Levi replied, his arm tight around her waist. "But the marshal's right. We should consider moving up the wedding." Charlotte, practical as always, was already thinking ahead. "We could have it here at the house. After Christmas, but before the worst of the winter weather. It would be small, of course, just family and a few neighbors." Lucas nodded his agreement. "Reverend Thompson could ride out. No need to wait until spring." Harriet looked up at Levi, finding in his eyes the same love and certainty she felt in her heart. "I'd like that," she said softly. "Would you, Harriet Lawson?" Levi said, taking both her hands in his. "I'd marry you tomorrow if we could find a preacher that quick." And so it was decided. The wedding would take place the first week of January, a new beginning to match the new year. Charlotte threw herself into preparations, planning a simple but beautiful ceremony and feast. Harriet worked alongside her, sewing a wedding dress of deep blue wool. "Not white this time," she said with a laugh. "I think I've had enough of white wedding gowns." Christmas came and went, a joyous celebration that strengthened the bonds between them all. William and Sarah were enchanted by the small gifts Levi and Harriet had secretly ordered from the general store in Miller's Station. And the adults exchanged simple but meaningful presents: a hand-carved pipe for Lucas, a set of hairpins for Charlotte, a new journal for Harriet, and for Levi, a fine leather wallet embossed with his initials, a gift from his bride-to-be. On the morning of January 5, 1876. Harriet stood in the small bedroom that had been hers since coming to Quinn's Crossing, Charlotte helping her with the buttons of her blue wool dress. "Are you nervous?" Charlotte asked, arranging Harriet's hair in a simple but elegant style. Harriet considered the question. "No," she said, realizing it was true. "Not about marrying Levi. That feels right in a way nothing else ever has." Charlotte smiled, placing the last pin in Harriet's hair. "That's how it should feel, like coming home." "Yes," Harriet agreed softly. "Like coming home." Downstairs, the main room had been transformed. The furniture had been moved against the walls to make space for the small gathering of guests, Lucas's ranch hands, a few neighbors from nearby farms, and Reverend Thompson, who had ridden out through a light snowfall to perform the ceremony. Levi waited by the fireplace, handsome in a new shirt and his best trousers, his dark hair neatly combed, his copper eyes warm with anticipation. When Harriet appeared at the top of the stairs, those eyes fixed on her with such naked adoration that she felt her heart might burst with happiness. The ceremony was simple but deeply meaningful. They exchanged vows they had written themselves, promises to love and honor, to support and cherish, to build a life together based on mutual respect and understanding. "I, Levi Matthew Quinn, take you, Harriet Jane Lawson, as my wife," Levi said, his voice steady and sure. "I promise to love you freely and fully, to honor your strength and courage, to walk beside you through whatever life brings from this day until my last." Harriet's eyes shimmered with tears as she responded. "I, Harriet Jane Lawson, take you, Levi Matthew Quinn, as my husband. I promise to love you with an open heart, to honor your kindness and integrity, to build with you a home filled with joy and understanding, from this day until my last." They exchanged simple gold bands purchased from Miller's Station's jeweler, and when Reverend Thompson pronounced them husband and wife, Levi drew Harriet into a kiss that left no doubt of his love or his joy in their union. The celebration that followed was warm and lively. Charlotte had outdone herself with the feast: roast beef, vegetables from their root cellar, fresh bread, and a wedding cake decorated with preserved berries. There was music from a neighbor who played the fiddle, dancing in the cleared space of the main room, and toasts to the health and happiness of the newly married couple. As the afternoon light began to fade, Lucas stood and raised his glass for a final toast. "To my brother Levi and his bride Harriet," he said, his voice rich with emotion. "May your love grow stronger with each passing day, and may the home you build together be filled with laughter, with understanding, and with the kind of courage that brought you both here today." "Hear, hear." The guests responded, raising their glasses. Later, as the last guests departed and the family began to clear away the remains of the feast, Lucas pulled Levi aside. "Charlotte and I have a wedding gift for you both," he said, pressing a key into Levi's hand. "The old trapper's cabin on the south property. We've been fixing it up these past weeks: new roof, repaired floor, fresh chinked logs. It's small, but it's warm and private. A place for you and Harriet to start your married life while you build your own home come spring." Levi embraced his brother, too moved for words at first. "Thank you," he finally managed, "for everything." Lucas thumped him on the back. "Just be happy, little brother. That's all the thanks I need." That evening, Levi and Harriet rode through the gathering dusk to the cabin, a mile from the main house, but still within the boundaries of Quinn's Crossing. As promised, it had been transformed from the rough shelter it once was to a cozy, if simple, home. A fire had been laid and lit in the stone fireplace, casting warm light over the single room. A new bed with fresh linen stood in one corner, a small table and 2 chairs in another. Shelves held basic provisions, and a Dutch oven hung ready by the hearth. "It's perfect," Harriet said, turning in a slow circle to take it all in. Levi set down their bags, his own well-worn saddlebags and the new carpetbag Charlotte had given Harriet for her growing collection of belongings. "It's not much," he said, a hint of uncertainty in his voice. "Not compared to your father's ranch." Harriet went to him, placing her hands on his chest. "It's everything," she said softly, "because it's ours. Our first home together." Levi's arms encircled her waist, drawing her closer. "Have I told you today how much I love you, Mrs. Quinn?" Perhaps," Harriet murmured, rising on tiptoe to brush her lips against his. "But I wouldn't mind hearing it again." "I love you," Levi whispered against her mouth, "more than I ever thought possible." "And I love you," Harriet replied, her hands sliding up to twine around his neck. "My rescuer, my friend, my husband." Their kiss deepened, months of restrained passion finally finding release now that they were truly alone, truly bound to each other. As the fire crackled in the hearth, and the winter night closed in around their small sanctuary, Harriet and Levi began the intimate dance of marriage, learning each other's bodies with the same care and reverence they had learned each other's hearts. Later, lying in each other's arms beneath warm quilts, they talked softly of the future, the house they would build come spring, the family they hoped to create, the life they would share at Quinn's Crossing. "Are you happy, Harriet?" Levi asked, his fingers tracing gentle patterns on her bare shoulder. Harriet lifted her head from his chest to meet his gaze. "Happier than I ever dreamed possible," she said truthfully. "Are you?" Levi's smile was tender in the firelight. "I spent 10 years wandering, looking for something I couldn't name. Now I know what it was." "What?" Harriet asked. "You," Levi said simply. "A place to belong, a love worth staying for." As winter gave way to spring, Levi and Harriet settled into the rhythms of married life. They spent their days working Levi with Lucas and the hands, managing the growing herd of cattle and preparing fields for planting. Harriet with Charlotte, who had given birth to a healthy son in late March. In the evenings, they returned to their small cabin, cooking simple meals together, talking about their days and falling asleep in each other's arms. On weekends, weather permitting, they worked on the site of their future home. Lucas had been right about the south pasture near the creek. It was perfect, with good water, shelter from the north wind, and a view of the mountains beyond. Levi cleared the ground and prepared the foundation, while Harriet planted a garden that would be ready by the time the house was complete. They received one letter from Harriet's father that spring, forwarded by the marshal who had visited them. It was brief and cold, stating that he had disowned her for her disobedience and ingratitude, and that she should not expect any further communication or support from him. Though Harriet had expected as much, the finality of it still stung. "Are you all right?" Levi asked, finding her sitting by the creek after reading the letter, her eyes red from crying. "Yes," she said, taking his hand as he sat beside her. "I knew this was coming, it's just. He's still my father. I wish he could understand that I had to make my own choice." Levi wrapped his arm around her shoulders. "Some people can't accept choices that don't align with their own plans. My father was the same." "Do you ever regret the rift with your family?" Harriet asked. Levi was thoughtful. "I regret the pain it caused my mother, and sometimes I wish my father could have seen that there were many ways to be a successful man, not just his way." He kissed her temple. "But I don't regret the path I took. It led me to you." By midsummer, their house was taking shape, a solid structure of logs and timber, larger than the cabin but still modest, with 3 bedrooms. "For the children we hope to have," Harriet had said, blushing. "A kitchen with a proper stove, a main room with a stone fireplace, and a wide porch where they could sit and watch the sunset over the valley." As August ripened toward September, they moved into their new home, though it was still not entirely finished. The roof was on, the windows and doors in place, the floors laid, but some interior work remained to be done as time allowed. "It's beautiful," Harriet said as they stood in the doorway on their first night, surveying the main room with its gleaming wood floors and the fire crackling in the new hearth. "It's ours," Levi replied, pulling her close. "Our home, the one we built together." That night, in their new bedroom with moonlight spilling through the windows, they made love with a tenderness born of the knowledge that they had created this sanctuary together, this place that was truly theirs. Afterward, as Harriet lay with her head on Levi's chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart, she felt a deep contentment wash over her. From that desperate flight from the church in Yosemite to this peaceful night in their own home, what a journey it had been. "What are you thinking?" Levi asked, his fingers playing with her loose hair. Harriet smiled against his skin. "I'm thinking how glad I am that I ran from that church, and how fortunate I was that a certain cowboy happened to be passing by just then." "Fortunate for us both," Levi murmured, his arms tightening around her. 5 years later, the spring sunshine warmed the wide porch of the Quinn house, now expanded to accommodate their growing family. Harriet sat in a rocking chair, watching as Levi chased their 3-year-old son Matthew across the yard, the boy's delighted squeals mixing with his father's deeper laughter. Nearby, 4-year-old Elizabeth carefully arranged stones in patterns on the porch floor, her dark hair so like her father's falling across her face as she concentrated. Inside, their newest addition, 1-month-old Rebecca, slept peacefully in her cradle, exhausted from her morning feeding. Harriet's gaze drifted beyond her immediate family to where Lucas and Charlotte's children played with the new pony their father had given them for Christmas. The ranch had prospered over the years, expanding to include more land, more cattle, and more hands to manage it all. Quinn's Crossing had become known throughout the valley for its fine stock and the fair dealings of the Quinn brothers. Life wasn't always easy. There had been a difficult winter 2 years back when feed ran low and cattle were lost. A summer when drought threatened their crops. The usual challenges of raising young children while managing a working ranch. But through it all, the bond between Harriet and Levi had only strengthened, their love deepening with each challenge faced together, each joy shared. "Mama, look," Matthew called, perched now on his father's shoulders as Levi strode toward the porch. "I'm tall as a tree." "I see that," Harriet laughed, holding out her arms as Levi swung the boy down. "You'll be taller than your papa soon if you keep growing like this." "Not for a while yet," Levi said, ruffling his son's hair before bending to kiss Harriet. "How's our littlest one?" "Sleeping finally," Harriet replied. "She has your determination. Refused to close her eyes until she was good and ready." Levi grinned. "Sounds like another woman I know." Elizabeth looked up from her stone patterns. "Papa, will you help me build a fort later, a big one for all my treasures?" "Of course, Princess," Levi promised, crouching to examine her work. "That's a fine pattern you're making, like a star, isn't it?" Elizabeth nodded solemnly. "It's for Mama, because she's as pretty as a star." Levi's eyes met Harriet's over their daughter's head, warm with shared love for this child they had created. "She certainly is," he agreed. Later that evening, after the children were asleep, Harriet and Levi sat on the porch swing, watching as the first stars appeared in the deepening blue of the sky. Levi's arm was around her shoulders, his warmth a comfort in the cooling evening air. "I got a letter from my mother today," he said quietly. "First one in nearly a year." Harriet turned to look at him. "What did she say?" "She's coming to visit. Next month if the weather holds for travel." Levi's expression was a mix of anticipation and apprehension. "She wants to meet her grandchildren." "Oh, Levi," Harriet breathed, squeezing his hand. That's wonderful news. Levi nodded slowly. It is. I've wanted her to be part of our lives for so long, I just hope. She'll love them, Harriet assured him. How could she not? And they'll love her. And you? Levi asked, a hint of vulnerability in his voice. After all these years of silence, she's your mother, Harriet said simply. And she's coming now when she can, that's what matters. Levi pulled her closer, pressing a kiss to her temple. Have I told you lately how lucky I am to have found you? Harriet smiled, leaning into his embrace. You mean how lucky I am that you happened to be riding past that church just when I needed you most? Maybe it wasn't luck at all, Levi mused. Maybe it was fate. Fate or luck, I'm grateful, Harriet said softly. Every day. As night settled fully over Quinn's Crossing, Harriet reflected on the journey that had brought her here from a runaway bride with nothing but the clothes on her back to a woman surrounded by love, with a home, a family, and a future brighter than she could have imagined that October morning in 1875. She had been running away that day, fleeing a life she didn't want. But in truth, she had been running toward something toward freedom, toward the chance to choose her own path. And when Levi Quinn had extended his hand and said, "Get on quick," she had taken that chance, not knowing where it might lead but certain it was better than the life she was leaving behind. How right she had been. How very right.